Mastering a class means understanding a class, which unfortunately means, you guessed it, theory. In this video, we won't go into the details of each spy weapon and how they function. What we will do, however, is take a look at the mechanics they almost all have in common. That means we can break it down into 6 parts: Spy himself and his toolkit, the guns, the zappers, the knives, the disguise kit, and last but not least, the watches. Spy himself. The spy is what you'd call a light class, tied with scout, engineer, and sniper for the lowest health pool. This doesn't mean he's bad in 1v1 scenarios. He's surprisingly good in those, so long as you stick to the golden rule for the light classes. Pick your own battles. What this means is that if you're the one who engages in a 1v1 first, you're more likely to come out on top. On the other hand, if someone engages you in a 1v1 first, it's better to try and avoid that fight, unless you're the one able to get first damage in which case you should still probably take that fight. The spy also has perhaps the greatest skill in all of TF2 to decide which battles to take and which ones not to. The ability to see the current health of his opponents. Now, if all you do is backstab people, this ability would be wasted on you. And that's why Spy's primary weapon isn't his knife, it's his gun. But more on that later. He's also tied with the medic as the second fastest class in TF2. This is a tremendous help in gaining on your potential victims. In essence, it means that over short enough distances, you can catch up to 6 out of the 9 classes and plant your knife in their backs. Now, why am I stressing that it's over short enough distances? Surely that argument goes for long distances as well. And this is because everyone, barring new players, will periodically check their backs. It's a good habit to have, and you should consider doing the same. Keep in mind though, your speed as a spy is dependent on what class you're currently disguised as, and it won't go over the spy's maximum speed. Disguising as a scout won't make you run any faster. Disguising as any of the slower classes though, will make you run slower. I'll have their respective speeds up on the board for you. Now, the exact percentages aren't that important to know, but being able to rank them from slowest to fastest is definitely useful. The only exception, where you don't lose any speed when disguised as one of the slower classes, is when you're cloaked. The guns. Most new players underestimate the power of Spy's guns, and tend to focus more on the instant killing potential of his knife. Now this is a mindset I discourage. As previously mentioned, a spy can see the health of his targets, which allows you to easily take out players on low health. In general, a good spy should walk around with his gun out and only switch to the knife when an opportunity to get a backstab arises. If you find yourself running into an unaware target with 125 health or less and no one else is around, you can get the first shot on them for free. And from that point on, 1 or 2 more should get the job done. The first shot from your gun is pinpoint accurate, with subsequent shots being less precise when fired in quick succession. Waiting for 1.25 seconds will reset it back to that pinpoint accurate shot. You yourself will have to decide whether you spam your shots or wait for that accuracy to reset, depending on the situation. As a rule of thumb, hold primary fire down whenever you're close to your target, as random spread kicking in won't matter much in that scenario, and at medium or further distances, it's better to go for those accurate shots. Speaking of which, almost all weapons have a mechanic called damage fall-off. The stock revolver will deal 60 damage at point-blank range, with its damage decreasing the farther away the target is, capping at a minimum damage of 21. The only way to really get to grips with how much damage your gun will do at varying distances is to practice with it. Don't pass up frags that you know you should be able to get, even if at first you might not hit most, if any, of your shots. In the wise words of Jake the dog, dude, sucking at something is the first step towards being sorta good at something. The zapper. The zapper only has a single use: disabling and slowly destroying an engineer's buildings. Unlike stabbing and shooting, applying a zapper won't get rid of your disguise. On top of that, it has a much longer range than you'd expect and can be spammed very effectively. From the moment you place a zapper on a building, it will cease to function, and its health will decrease at a set pace until it's eventually destroyed. The engineer will immediately be notified and call out that his building is being sapped. Something to keep in mind is that the spy who sapped an engineer's sentry gun will deal a third less damage to that sentry while it's still being zapped. An engineer can remove a zapper by whacking it twice with his wrench, and an assisting pyro equipped with a homewrecker or neon annihilator can remove it in just a single swing. Zapping one side of an active teleporter will apply the zapper to both ends, and it only needs to be removed from one side to remove the both of them. The knives. Now we're getting to the part that is undoubtedly the most attractive part of playing Spy. The knife. The knife is guaranteed to kill any player in a single hit, provided it is done from behind and they aren't currently ubered. It's important to understand that what TF2 considers as behind is a lot more lenient than is intuitive at first. Imagine a player model being a sphere. Now if you were to cut that sphere in two, dividing it in a front and a back half, anywhere you stab on this back half will count as a backstab. Which means that if you stab them in their feet or even on their head, all the game cares about is whether or not you hit that back half. This also means you can trick people into turning their backs towards you for a fraction of a second and stab them in their backs as far as the game is concerned, which is the basis of most trick stabs. Another way in which the knives are unique is that they are the only melee weapons in the game that are considered hit scan. What this means is that the moment you click is the moment the game will check whether or not the hit lands, whereas other melee weapons have a slight wind-up time. Now, on to talk about the less glorious side of the knife, striking the player model on the front, or what is commonly referred to as a butter knife. When you hit the front of a player with a knife, it will always deal 40 damage, and killing a light class in this way, while not impossible, is going to take you 4 swings, which is far from ideal. This is still not all bad though. When you're out of bullets and your opponent is within melee range and at 40 health or below, it's much faster to go for the butter knife to finish them off than it is to reload. Fail stabs are a common occurrence in TF2, as is its polar opposite, the face stab. The way the game works is that there's 2 sides to hit registration, client side and server side. Your game will constantly send information to the server about your current position, actions, etc. The server will then gather the client-side information from all players and arrange it into an order of events that will become the true order of events. Everyone has different network settings, alongside different connection strengths, and the server has to make sense of it all. So even if a player might have their back turned towards you at the moment you stab, on their end they may have already turned around, and once the server gets the data from you both, it may conclude that they didn't have their back turned towards you, even if that was never the case on your end, resulting in a failed backstab, a fail stab. Of course, the opposite is also true. They may have been facing you as you clicked, but have turned too much on their side, exposing their back, resulting in the server registering it as a backstab, a face stab. Now, it isn't always as fair as I describe here, and packet loss and lag compensation will still result in a fail stab or face stab regardless of circumstance, but this happens far less than you'd think. In the end, it's best to just consider fail stabs as your game not having updated fast enough on your end, and face stabs as you becoming the epic spy you know you've got inside of you. Thinking of it in this way will be much less frustrating. One last detail I'd like to mention is that even though a backstab on an Ubered player cannot harm them in any direct ways, if they are jumping or are in midair at the moment of the backstab, it will still send them flying, often far enough for the Uber beam to no longer be connected. Players have a habit of jumping often, and you'd be surprised at how often this opportunity presents itself. The Disguise Kit. The Disguise Kit, as its name would imply, allows the spy to disguise himself into any teammate or member of the opposing team. Disguising as a member of the opposite team is what comes up when you first take out the kit, and pressing your reload key will let you disguise as a teammate. You can even disguise yourself when you're invisible, which is the prime moment to do so. A common mistake new and even veteran players make is to disguise too early when turning invisible. Disguising will cloak players in a small cloud of smoke. This cloud lasts about 2 seconds if you weren't previously disguised, and about 1 second if you were redisguising. If you disguise and then immediately cloak, the smoke will still be visible for its 2-second duration, so watch out for that. If you're used to Spy's last disguise button, it's a habit you may have picked up and should try getting rid of. As previously mentioned, you will walk at the speed of the class you're currently disguised as, if it's a class slower than you, and disguising as a scout still won't make you run any faster. Another thing a disguise won't change is your hitbox, which may seem counterintuitive at first. Think of it as the spy wearing a costume. If you were to shoot a part of the costume, but not hit the spy underneath, the spy would be unharmed. The most popular disguise is the Scout. This is because Scout's head model is positioned on the chest of a disguised spy, and this makes it harder for inexperienced snipers to headshot you. An experienced sniper will just shoot above the head model though. Another upside of the Scout disguise is that it's the smallest model, and when hiding in and around corners, his weapon won't poke out as much, whereas for most other classes this isn't the case. Unfortunately, a real Scout moves faster than a spy, and this is a real attention grabber. However, every class moves slightly slower when backpedaling, and when you're doing just that, players are less likely to pick up on the fact that you're moving too slow. When disguised, you are mostly immune to damage knockback. This is where the undisguised button comes in, but that will require its own video. Being disguised as an enemy will fool sentries, causing them to not target you. Disguising in front of a sentry that already locked onto you will not fool the sentry until you break a line of sight and redisguise, so be sure to do that. Your disguise also allows you to make use of enemy dispensers and their payload cards. You can even take enemy teleporters as a spy, regardless of disguise and whether or not you're invisible. If any opponent is standing on the teleporter exit as you come through, it will instantly kill them, even when they're Ubered. This is called a telefrag. The same thing can happen to you though, so best to move away from the teleporter as soon as you go through it. If you want to change the current weapon your disguise is holding out, switch your weapon to the corresponding weapon slot and press your spy last disguise button. Don't worry, the smoke cloud won't appear when you do this. Make sure to vary your disguises often and whenever you've been spotted. Disguises don't fool players for long, but they can still fool them, and all you need is a few precious seconds. The watches. Last but not least are the watches. These allow the spy to become invisible. This is incredibly useful, as not being seen is obviously the easiest way to get behind enemy lines and into favorable positions. It takes a full second to turn completely invisible and 1.8 seconds to become visible again, and you won't be able to stab, shoot or sap until you're completely uncloaked. You'll also need to wait half a second before you can cloak after attempting a stab. This rule doesn't apply to sapping and shooting. Unfortunately, uncloaking and cloaking makes a very distinct sound, and a trained ear will be able to catch it. Therefore, it's better to uncloak when there's a lot of noise going on, and you only want to engage enemy players who are distracted anyway. Bumping into enemies or being damaged whilst invisible will briefly reveal your silhouette. An invisible spy caught out is more often than not a dead spy, so best to get out of there as soon as possible. With the stock InvisiWatch, you can be invisible for a full 10 seconds, but the first second is a transitioning period, so effectively it's just 9 seconds. Being uncloaked will passively restore your cloak meter from empty to full in 30 seconds. This is way too long to be of much use, and luckily, picking up ammo packs and metal will restore the meter even when you're cloaked. You can even recharge it with enemy dispensers when disguised, cloaked or not. A level 1 dispenser will recharge your meter just as fast as it depletes, and level 2s and 3s will restore it faster than it can drain. And lastly, as soon as you turn invisible, the second you click that right mouse button, you will take 20% less damage, and debuffs like the Jarate, Mad Milk, Bleed and Afterburn will only last half their remaining duration. That should wrap up the basic mechanics. I've undoubtedly missed a thing or two, but we will go more in depth on those things and exceptions to these rules in future videos. The things I really want you to take away from this are: use your gun whenever the opportunity presents itself. Don't cloak too quickly after disguising, so as not to have the smoke cloud follow you around. Vary your disguises often, and be wary of what weapon your disguise has out. And only uncloak near enemies when they are distracted. That's it! I hope to see you handsome rogues in the other parts of my tutorials. PS. I noticed that most of you watching my videos aren't there you are! Man, I was looking all over the place for you. Sorry about that. Lost my dignity for a moment there.